Shalom, my name is Joseph Shulam. I'm continuing the teaching on 1 Samuel. We got to chapter 23, verse 7 in the last lesson, lesson 22. And we're starting now from 1 Samuel chapter 23, verse 8. But just a little bit of background. Saul is still looking for David to kill him. David is running away from Saul. David heard that the Philistines are giving a hard time to a village called Keilah, not far from the seacoast on the low hill country near the Philistine, on the west side of the tribe of Judea. And David goes over there, delivers. He asks God first whether he should go and fight the Philistines who are besieging Keilah, and God says, "Go, I will deliver the Philistines in your hand." And he goes, and Abiatar, the son of Ahimelech, the priest that gave David Goliath's sword and gave him the Shabbat showbread, comes down with the breastplate of the high priest with him. And Saul gets intelligence that David is in Keilah and that God is going to deliver David in his hand. Why? Because Keilah is a walled city with walls and with gates. And if he besieges the city, then David will be captured. And as Saul is on his way down to Keilah to capture David, he hears that the people are at war, and he is intent to go and hunt David in Keilah. David also has intelligence. David also has intelligence. One has the CIA, the other one has the NSA. They're both good. And David hears that Saul is still hunting him, and he wants to come and besiege Keilah, the city of Keilah. And David knows about this, and Saul is being quiet about the evil that he intends against David. And he also brings the priest with him, and bring your vest, your breastplate with you. And David prays to God. Verse 10 of chapter 23. He prays to God and says, "God of Israel, your servant has heard that Saul is coming to Keilah to destroy the city because of me. Will the citizens of Keilah deliver me to the hands of Saul? God of Israel, please tell your servant, shall I go down to Keilah?" God says, "Go down." Then David asks in verse 12, ask God again, "Will the citizens of Keilah deliver me to the hands of Saul?" God says, "They will deliver you." They will deliver you. But David still is obeying God because God told him to go. And he gets up, he and his 600 men with him, and they go from Keilah, and they go away from Keilah. And King Saul's intelligence tells him David has run away from Keilah and is no longer there. So Saul turns around and doesn't go to Keilah. And David is in the desert, meaning the Judean desert, on the east side of the central mountain range. David is in the desert, in fortresses, protected places, and he sits on the mountainside of the desert, the desert of Ziph. And all those days, Saul is looking for him, and God does not deliver David into the hands of Saul. And David sees that Saul is still hunting him, and he goes down to the woods in the desert of Ziph, a more wooded area. And Jonathan, the son of Saul, goes to the woods where David is, and he strengthens the hand of David before the Lord, in God's name, in other words. And he tells him, don't be afraid. The hand of my father Saul is not going to catch you. And you will be king of Israel, and I will be your second in command. And even my father Saul knows this. And again, in verse 18 in chapter 23, another covenant between David and Jonathan before the Lord. And David returns to the woods, and Jonathan goes home. And King Saul, that is in Gibeah, leaves Gibeah and goes to Ziph, to the desert of Ziph, which means southeast of Jerusalem. I would say between Jerusalem and Metzada, in that line, between Jerusalem and Metzada, in very harsh desert. And Saul goes down looking for David, that is hiding from him in the woods of Ziph. To the right of the desert, of the wilderness, verse 19. And verse 20 of 1 Samuel 23. And now Saul is told, go no, David is told, sorry, go as much as you want and go down to the king, because God, no, what am I reading? I'm not reading right. The people of Keilah are going to Saul and tell him where David is hiding, and they tell him, go down to Ziphim, God is going to deliver David to you in the hands of the king. And Saul tells the people in verse 21, oh, you're blessed by God because you have mercy on me. You shared that intelligence news with me where David is. And go and prepare and know and see and watch where David's place is, and bring me, spy on him, and bring me who has seen him. And because David is very, very cunning, very smart, very cunning, slippery kind of character. That's verse 22. Verse 23 of chapter 23. And you should know and see in all the places that it's possible for David to hide. And you will return to me, and I will go with you. And if he is there in the land that I'm looking for him, with all the families of Judah. And they went and they looked at the place of Zippah, the fortress of Zippah, before Saul, and David and his men in the desert of Maon. They have moved westward up to the edge of the mountain range, in the Arava, to the right of the harsh desert. And Saul and his men go down looking for David, and they go down to Selah, to the rock in the desert of Maon. And Saul hears, and chases after David in the desert of Maon and in the mountain area. And David and his men are in the mountains. And David is in a hurry to run away from Saul, and Saul and his men are surrounding David and David's men in order to catch them. And a messenger comes to King Saul and says, "Go quickly, because the Philistines are attacking the land." In other words, Saul is concentrating on trying to find David and catch him and kill him. In the meantime, the enemy, the Philistines, are attacking. They're not there. While Saul has a lot of his men with him, his army with him, they take advantage of the weakness in the land and attack. And this place, I wonder how it's translated to English. Verse 28 in chapter 23. Selah Machloket, how is it translated? It's very interesting. The rock of strife, the rock of dissension, or the rock of strife, the rock of faction. The place where David was, Saul renames it as the Selah Machloket, the rock of strife, the rock of dissension. And David leaves that place and goes to En Gedi. Now, En Gedi is one of the most interesting places in this land. It's in the desert, very close to the Dead Sea, opens up to the Dead Sea, and it's a gorge with 7 waterfalls in the middle of nowhere, where everything is dry and hot and miserable. That gorge is a Garden of Eden. It's got 7 waterfalls, gardens. It's got gazelles. It's got ibex. It's got wild animals of all kinds. Even a panther still lives there. There were many more, but there's only one family of panthers that survived there because of all the tourism and all the people and all the lack of care. So that's the end of chapter 23. I'm going to chapter 24. And so David goes to En Gedi. You could be a mile from En Gedi and not know about this gorge. Very deep gorge. The 7th waterfall is very tall, and it runs year-round, which in the desert, the source of water is unbelievably important. And he goes to hide there. And when Saul comes back from the battle with the Philistines, they tell him, David is in the desert in En Gedi. And Saul takes 3,000 men with him from all of Israel and goes hunting for David and for his men. On the verse 3 of chapter 24, it's a very interesting, the place that he goes to hunt for David is called Tzurei Hayelim, the rocks of the ibex. The ibex are a kind of a wild goat, halfway between a deer and a goat. Very long horns, beautiful animal. And there are many of them still there. They've been there. Saint John, the guy who wrote the book, The Wild Goats of En Gedi, uses those wild goats of En Gedi as a symbol of the believers, of the Messianic Jewish believers in Israel. A book that was written in the 60s or early 70s, The Wild Goats of En Gedi. I recommend to read it. I think we're mentioned there in the book. Anyway, so Saul goes down to the rocks of the wild goats of En Gedi, and he comes to the fences. The fences are where the normal animals are called, yeah, He goes to the fences, to the place where the shepherds come there seasonally, and on the highway, and there is no, on the way, not the highway, on the way inside that gorge, and there is a big cave there at the top of the gorge, and he goes there to use the bathroom in that cave. He's got 3,000 men, with him, and he goes there, goes inside the cave to use the bathroom. And David is hiding with a few of his people inside that cave. And the men of David tell him, now is your opportunity. Take care of your enemy. You can kill Saul right now in the cave. He's alone there, using the bathroom. And David says, God forbid, I will not touch Saul. Yeah, I will not touch Saul, even if I can. And instead of killing Saul, he cuts the edge of his garment. When a person is using the bathroom and you're close enough to cut the edge of his garment where he doesn't feel it, that means that he's almost using the bathroom on top of you. But David is there, and he successfully cuts the edge of Saul's garment without Saul knowing it, which means that Saul was crouching in the old Arab or Asian way of going to the bathroom. And he quietly cuts Saul's edge of his garment. And then David feels guilty. Verse 7 of chapter 24, verse 6 of chapter 24, David feels guilty that he cut the edge of Saul's garment. And he tells his men, David tells his men, may God forbid if I do such a thing as this to my Lord, the anointed one, the Messiah of the Lord, the anointed one of the Lord, that I should stretch out my hand and hurt the Messiah of the Lord, the Messiah of Jehovah. Literally, that's what it says twice. And David castigates his men. And he didn't let them get up and kill Saul when Saul comes out of the cave. And David gets up out of the cave and he calls Saul and says, Saul, King Saul. And he looks up, and David bows down before Saul with his face to the ground, almost like Obama bowed down to the king of Saudi Arabia. Maybe David more. And David tells Saul, don't listen to anybody's words. I am David. I don't want any evil to befall you. Here is this day your eyes can see that God had delivered you in my hand inside the cave, and I could have killed you, but I did not. I had mercy on you, because I am never going to raise my hand against my Lord, for you are the anointed one of God. You are my father. Father, look, see the edge of your garment in my hand. I cut the edge of your garment and didn't kill you. You should know now and see that I have no evil intent against you, and I am not going to commit a crime and a sin against you. You who hunt my life, you want to take my life, I am not going to hurt you. May the Lord be our judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me from you. And my hand is not going to touch you. I'm not going to do it. Like the old proverb, David says in verse 14, chapter 24, like the old proverb, from evil comes from evil people, and my hand is not going to be against you. And the king of Israel comes out. Against who are you coming out, king of Israel? Against who are you hunting? A dead dog? A flea? David likens himself as a dead dog and a flea in front of the 3,000 men of Saul and King Saul himself, and in front of all of his men, 600 men of his own. He calls Saul father. He says, who are you hunting? A dead dog. I am a dead dog. You're hunting me. I am a flea. You're hunting me. It's not worth your effort to hunt me. I'm not against you. And let the Lord be the judge between me and you. And may the Lord see my opponent. And let the Lord judge me from your hand. And when David finishes his speech and says these things to Saul, Saul's response is this. I get goosebumps, chills, reading this text. Saul's response is that you, my son David? And Saul starts crying. And Saul says to David in chapter 24, verse 18, you are righteous. You are more righteous than I am. You've returned good to me, and I have returned bad to you. These are so, I can't express to you, it sounds like a regular narrative. It's not. I will summarize it in a few minutes, and you'll see how big this text is. David is acting here according to Yeshua's teaching, or Yeshua's teaching is according to David's actions. Saul tells David, you have given me good when I've been seeking your evil, to do you evil. You have done good to me when I've wanted to do evil to you. That is a messianic paradigm that we all have to learn it in life. And Saul called David a righteous person. Says, you are more righteous than I am. I wanted to kill you, and you saved you didn't touch me. You didn't hurt me. This day you've done a great thing for me. God delivered me to your hand, King Saul says to David. God, gave you an opportunity to kill me. And you are like a man who found his enemy, and instead of killing his enemy, released him in a good way. May God pay you good for what you have done to me today. In other words, Saul is blessing David. May God bless you with good for the fact that you spared my life today. And now Saul said what Jonathan had said earlier in the last chapter. And now here I know for sure that you are going to be the king and you will rule. and the kingdom of Israel will grow, will arise, will succeed, will become great with you in your hands. Saul, the guy who's looking for David, up and down the country, into the desert, into the caves, now is blessing David. And now Saul is begging David in verse 22, says, please swear to me in God's name that you're not going to destroy my progeny, my children after me. Even if you destroy my name from my father's house, don't destroy my children. And David swears to Saul. And Saul goes back to his house, and David and his men go out of the fortresses in the desert, and Samuel dies. That's verse 1 of chapter 25. So let me summarize what's going on here. How smart the wisdom of God that David receives from God here. How smart. Because if he would have killed the king, he would have never been king of Israel. He would have been outlaw. He would have been the person who killed the king of Israel. And since Saul was the first king anointed by God in front of Israel, 3 times he was anointed by Samuel alone, then in Mizpah in front of the leadership of Israel, and then in Gilgal in front of the armies of Israel and their leaders. David realizes with all the evil that Saul wants against him, he is still the anointed one of God. And he says, I'm not going to do anything against the anointed one of God. And King Saul melts in En-Gedi in front of 3,000 of his soldiers when he realized that David didn't kill him. David is a very cunning, calculating character that doesn't do anything without 3 ingredients that we all need to learn. First of all, he asks God, shall I go to Keilah or not? And he waits for God's answer, guidance. Is this guidance available to us today? I think so. I think that if we're honest with God, sincere with God, serving God and his people, serving God's people and God, I should say, with a clear and open heart, and we ask God, we have promises in the New Testament that if we ask, we will receive. If we ask for wisdom, we will receive. If we ask amiss, the way the letter of James says, then we're not going to receive because God loves us. Sometimes some things we ask that God knows is not good for us, like a good parent to his children, he says, no, I'm not going to give that to my child. It's going to die. Even though he's crying, he's throwing a tantrum on the ground, rolling on the ground. But I'm not going to give it to him because it's not good for him. We need to know that sometimes we want things that are not good for us. And James, in the epistle of James, speaks about this. We ask amiss in the language of the King James. And God says, no, I'm not going to give you what's not good for you, what's going to damage you. You think you need it, you think you want it, but it might damage you, and I'm not going to give you something that will damage you. So David, in a very smart move, and it's not the only time, we're going to see more times of the same thing, that he had a chance to kill Saul, and he doesn't. He doesn't for 3 reasons. One is he knows that it's not the will of God. Second of all, he knows that it's not politically smart for him to do it, because if he does, he will be outlawed as a murderer of the king. And the third reason, he knows that he's got to gain the name of a godly person, a person that doesn't touch the anointed one of God, a person who doesn't take the law into his own hand, even though it looks like this to his advantage. Politically smart, spiritually correct, righteous. Even Saul calls David righteous in this scene. Righteous, that he has the power to do something that looks like this to his benefit, and he doesn't do it because of his honor and his respect for God's anointed one. So, some other great lessons here, great teachings here. And we have to learn from David so much, so much. Which one of us, if we were hunted and somebody wanted to kill us, and we had a chance to kill him back, which one of us will withhold his passion, his what looks like his self-interest, because he respects and fears God and doesn't want to touch God's anointed one? There's so many lessons to be learned from this text. I went quickly, but we're going to see some of these same lessons repeated in the next chapters. May God bless all of you, and I will be, Lord willing, again on Tuesday, recording live again, chapter 25 from verse 1. Samuel dies, and then story continues. God bless all of you. Keep reading the Bible. Amen.